Thanks everyone for attending. I'm Jeff Kauffman in the Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering Department, and I run the Structural Dynamics and Adaptive Structures Lab. So I've been here at UCF for about 10 years. I'm associate professor, and as the title was, my interest is in adaptive structures, and particularly the structural dynamics of them. So we kind of bridge the two areas there. I'm very heavily involved in AIAA, which is the Aerospace Engineering Professional Society, particularly the Adaptive Structures Technical Committee. I enjoy teaching courses both at the undergrad and grad level in primarily what we call the mechanical systems, things like vibrations, controls, mechanics, dynamics, as well as aerostructures, things of that nature. So I really like adaptive structures because I think they create unique engineering opportunities that are just fun things to think about. What can we do with these devices? And so one thing that motivates us is, maybe a little bit of a shocking picture here, but an example of high cycle fatigue. This is one thing that's motivated most of my work, even since grad school. And so at the lower left, we have an image of taken from an airplane by a passenger. This was a flight that took off out of Denver. It was United Flight 328, maybe 2 years ago. But this happens from time to time, and obviously this would be frightening as a passenger. Fortunately, everyone was fine. They flew around for a little bit to assess the issue and probably burn off some fuel and landed shortly later. But what happened was high cycle fatigue on a blade inside the engine. And so just like if we were to bend a paperclip back and forth, it'll break. The more we bend it back and forth, the quicker it'll break. So the same thing happens with these really complex structures too, where a particular blade in the engine, in this case, it was the one that's broken off up here at the right. It experienced too much vibration over time and fatigued over millions and millions of vibration cycles and broke. And we can see, it obviously damaged lots of other things around it. So this one's broken as well. And so one of the things that we think about is, are we able to use these adaptive structures to reduce this vibration and try to extend the life and prevent these catastrophic failures? So I'll just call your attention briefly to the geometry of this particular blade. We see that it's curved, it has internal structure, it's twisted as it goes along the length, has varying thickness. So these can be really complex structures, and what we do in our lab is we try to approach these problems with really fundamental and academic structures. So that's what drives a lot of our effort. But what's really great about it is that we can still retain the key dynamics. So we can capture those complex phenomena that lead to the high cycle fatigue, for example, even with these simpler systems. It's like here's a simple flat plate. So maybe you can kind of see the parallels between this. Sure, we treat these as sort of an 8-bladed system in this case. They're flat. There's no curvature, no interior geometry, for example, but it still experiences fatigue and vibration the same way that a more complex structure does. And it's a much more experimentally tractable problem for us to approach. So we do this with other classic structures too, the good old cantilever beam, for example, where we can look at vibration response and damping and look at different sorts of solutions. And then, we also have to think about what our applications are. And so in this particular one on the right, we were actually looking at an attempt to address Parkinsonian and essential tremor. So I had a grad student whose dissertation was on arresting that tremor using a feedback control in a sense. And so we had to come up with a little system that would sort of mimic the respective stiffness of like a wrist joint and associated muscle around there. So those are the sorts of things that we like to work on. To do these problems, we use low order models. So we like to reduce the complexities, as I was saying, so we can get to the fundamental physics and the phenomena that are there. And along the way, that enables us to do some really interesting things. We can think about not only those core problems, like how does the vibration lead to fatigue, or how can we reduce the vibration that leads to fatigue, But also, if we are going to use one of these adaptive structures or an adaptive device like a piezoelectric patch or something, where do we put it? How do we integrate it into our system? These are the sorts of questions that we need to be able to address and answer to be able to use these devices effectively and safely. So we also use this for, I've mentioned vibration reduction a lot. We also look at it the other side as energy harvesting. And so one thing that's neat about a lot of the devices we use is that we can use them as actuators. So we apply like a voltage to them, for example, and then it creates a mechanical response, or maybe it's a temperature or even a magnetic field, and it creates a mechanical response. But we can go the other way around too. And so we can apply a mechanical input to it and get, say, a voltage response or something else like that. And so there's been some work on creating small energy harvesters for sort of remote power applications. You might think of places where you might use a lot of batteries on like wireless sensor nodes, for example. So we look at things like that, and you can do this combined sensing and actuation. And what it allowed us to do in this particular case was take a system that had a very dynamic, even chaotic response, and stabilize that chaotic response, which normally we think it's just we don't know where it's going to go really because it's a chaotic system. But we were able to stabilize it to a periodic orbit, and then we could understand it a lot better. And we could control it and even harvest energy from, which was a pretty cool thing we were able to accomplish. So with our focus on the structural dynamics of adaptive structures, we need to look at vibration reduction and damping as a whole as well. So we look at the devices that I've kind of been talking about, but then also mechanisms for damping and models by which we would predict damping performance and the level of vibration that we might see. So here at the left is one collaboration that actually started here at UCF and is now with University of Tennessee as well. And it was started by noticing how insects and other sort of millimetric sized flyers eject water from their wings. And so they have this interesting flutter stroke that sends the water droplets off, and they can either eject straight off the surface or normal to the surface, as we call it. Sometimes they'll sort of slide off the end. Other times part of the drop comes away, but part of it stays adhered to the wing. And so we've created little sort of kapton beams to mimic the insect wing and then vibrate them with drops on them. And what we've learned in doing this is that not only is the droplet ejection an interesting feature, but it also provides damping and affects the vibration of the wing. And so we've been investigating that for a couple of years now as well. And it leads to new questions of, what are the actual mechanisms of dissipation in these highly coupled fluid structure physics. We also try to develop models that can capture these different sorts of damping mechanisms. So I really like this project because this is even stretching back to my grad school days. But I like this project because it was very practical in the sense of satellites have a lot of power and data cables on them. And in fact, some of them will even have like 25% of their dry mass is just cabling, which is pretty wild to think about for me anyway. I'm just thinking about how much cabling runs throughout the entire satellite structure. But you have these wires that are then twisted pairs, and then they get stitched together and then wrapped with kapton. And what we found is that the level of damping really depends on who does this. So it was very technician dependent. But if we averaged it all out, we were able to come up with a damping model that did a reasonably good job. I mean, the red line pretty well overlays the black line without, we don't have a ridiculous number of tuning parameters here. There's one or two maybe, but it does a pretty good job of capturing the average damping performance, which is not perfect, but it's a great place to start. And then we also have done some work on under platform dampers and looking at those sorts of devices as well, things like friction damping and trying to model that effectively. So finally, I want to add that we really enjoy working with undergraduate students as well, both here at UCF and from across the country, for example, through the Hyper REU program. So we tend to do things that are a little more hands-on. We like to get students involved in research, get them that exposure, and maybe it helps orient them towards a career involving research, whether in grad school or beyond. But we like to do these sort of hands-on examples and get them thinking about how you apply your coursework to these applied engineering problems. And so, even things that might be considered a little backyard engineering, but I think that's great for mechanical and aerospace engineers. This particular one, we got a pool pump motor and use that to convert the rotary to linear motion, and use that to drive a sort of a vibration table of sorts here for a very specific problem where it worked out really well. So I certainly want to acknowledge my students, both former and current, whose work has been showcased in this short talk, and recognize the collaborators and funding sources that have sponsored my work. And thanks. I'd be happy to take any questions.